A crack split the air on a ruined street in Naha, and a Marine sergeant took a perfect center-mass hit, staggered, spit dust, and didn't go down. He slammed his back to a wall, yanked open his herringbone jacket, and stared at the spider-webbed plate tucked inside. He could feel the ache deep in his chest, the taste of cordite, the blast of fear that always followed the first second after impact, but he was alive and moving with his M1 Garand ready. 2 houses over, the German-trained sniper blinked behind a 4x scope mounted to a Mauser 98K, stunned that his 200-meter shot had failed the old arithmetic. Center mass had always equaled a telegram home. Today it equaled a bruised target who advanced. That plate was no talisman. It was Doron fiberglass cloth, resign pressed into light, hard panels, and Americans had stitched it into pockets inside utility jackets in early 1945. The old steel cuirass stopped bullets but turned men into statues. The United States chose motion. On Okinawa, beginning 1 April 1945, Marines of the 1st Marine Division fought up from the Hagushi beaches through cane fields and shattered streets, testing vests that kept lungs intact when mortar fragments scythed low. Nobody pretended they were rifle-proof. They didn't need to be. Most battlefield wounds came from fragments, and these plates turned funerals into Purple Hearts and quick returns to the line. The sniper tried again. He shifted to a higher aim, knowing the math had changed, knowing more exposure meant more danger. A Browning automatic rifle M1918. A 2 growled from the American left. A Thompson M1A1 added its chopped rhythm from a doorway. Grenade spoons flicked off tile and clinked. Smoke drifted. A signal panel flashed for air above. A platoon leader spoke into a handset, voice calm, calling for a short stonk of 80, 1 millimeter on the block's far end. Across the street, the Marine who should have been dead pushed a fresh 8-round N-block clip into the Garand, felt the bite on his thumb, and nodded to move. He thought, briefly, of the hands that made the plate. Dow men in Michigan pressing glass into Doron. Quartermaster officers who tested, cut, and refit. A depot clerk who signed a crate bound for the Pacific. He thought of Willow Run turning out a B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes, and decided a country that could do that could make a vest that kept a father breathing. He thought of the corpsman who would have written his name in the wrong ledger. He stood, pain burning like a brand under the plate, and advanced because the mission demanded momentum. In the nest upstairs, the Marines found a neat stack of 7.9, 2 times 57 millimeters brass, a cracked side mount, and a penciled range card. The German had professionalism. He had patience. What he had lost, in a single breath, was certainty. A POW later said it plain, "I saw one fall and rise. I aimed again, but my certainty was gone." That sentence spread faster than any field order. It changed how enemy scouts crossed streets, how machine gunners chose lanes, how snipers risked the second glance. The vest did not make Americans invincible. It made them relentless. Mortar fragments that once punched holes through thoraxes now chewed cloth and barked ribs. Grenade bursts that used to open a chest into a medical impossibility now left ripped pockets, and a man who could still shout. A Type 99 Arisaka coughed from a second window. A Marine ducked, swore, and laughed as he slapped the crazed plate. "Caught one," he said, voice tight with relief. The laughter that followed was not bravado. It was oxygen. It turned panic into rhythm. Still, this change was bigger than any single plate. It was a loop, foxhole feedback, stateside stitching, faster shipments, smarter doctrine, radios stitched with armor stitched with air stitched with artillery schedules, all of it stitched with the American habit of shipping good today and better tomorrow. That habit could not be out-aimed. It could not be pinned down by a single master marksman. When the platoon kicked a door, the man who had taken the first hit was in the stack. When the platoon cleared the stair, he was on the net. When the platoon called the short stonk, he was the one saying, "Drop 50. War is brutish, inglorious, and a dirty business." A Marine would later write of Okinawa, and none of what saved that sergeant cleaned it up. It only honored him. It honored the men who made the plates, the corpsmen who taped ribs, the pilots who banked into smoke, the gunnery sergeants who made sure every vest went to a man who would hit a door first. It honored a national oath that said the mission was victory, and the method was bringing as many sons home as a free people could manage. When the block went quiet, the sergeant stood in the blown-out window and watched dust drift in the warm April light. He felt the deep ache where the Doran had spread the blow. He whispered, "Not today." The corpsman handed him a canteen instead of a last prayer. Outside, the section leader planted a panel so the F4U pilot circling above would know this roof was friendly. Down the alley, a runner trotted with news. The next street would be worse. Good. The men had breath, and breath meant speed. The German slipped out, low and careful, under falling tile. He would write the failure in a notebook later. Professionals log what breaks their rules. Somewhere in the States, a man at a press would log a different detail, the temperature and pressure that made one batch of Doran plates a hair tougher than the last. Those numbers met here, in a street where certainty had been king. The sniper's math died here. America's habit of learning faster lived here. Weeks later, the sergeant wrapped the cracked plate in brown paper and mailed it home. "This caught it for me," he wrote. His wife pressed a thumb to the starburst and cried for a minute that didn't exist in Verdun or at Dunkirk or in the winter of 1942. She dried her eyes and put the plate on the shelf. An ordinary thing, made by ordinary hands, had turned a sure kill into a story. That story marched with the 1st Marine Division across carved hills and cut roads, proof that a people who move fast and care hard can bend the odds for the men who carry the flag. The shot didn't land. The mission did. And every wall, every stairwell, every corner after that became a place where America's ideas outran an enemy's certainty. The sniper had been right about the wind, the distance, and the drop. He was wrong about the people he faced. The man he hit got up. That sound, the thud of boots rising, is the sound of a country deciding to win. A stateside technician in a canvas apron watched a press gauge kiss the right numbers and smiled, not knowing a lance corporal on Okinawa would thank him with his life. He cut Doran panels, resin-bonded laminated fiberglass that looked unimpressive stacked on a bench, and packed them into crates marked for the Pacific. He wasn't alone. Quartermaster planners signed off requisitions. Marine supply sergeants stitched pockets. Surgeons wrote memos about fragments that killed more often than bullets. None of them fired a shot. All of them changed what a sniper's bullet could do. The question had been simple and cruel. How do you save a chest without locking a soldier inside steel? The old answer plates of heavy metal stopped some rounds, but also stopped momentum. Americans demanded motion. Test rigs swung pendulums into gel torsos and aluminum thoraces. Medics logged wound paths. Line companies sent back notes like field-inked scripture. The result was a thin panel over the heart and lungs. It did not turn men into tanks. It turned seconds into minutes, and minutes on a battlefield where radios called mortars, where corsairs rolled in, where squads bounded by doctrine were oxygen. In April 1945, the 1st Marine Division drove inland. The last, hardest fight of the Pacific War demanded stubborn men who could move under fire. Fragment-heavy threats, grenades, mortar bursts, booby traps, splintering timber had always taken the silent toll. Now a vest turned silence into curses and movement. A corporal took a burst of hot shrapnel to the chest, coughed, rolled, waved off the corpsman, and got his fire team up the next alley. A platoon leader who would have been a memory 70 days earlier stayed on the net and dragged artillery 50 yards left. That's how a small thing becomes a big thing. It flows into radio calls, into maps, into the day's line of advance. The Marine Corps had always blended grit and curiosity. On the ship, a supply sergeant took a needle and thread and moved pockets because a tall private's vest rode wrong over his webgear. The next shipment came with the pocket higher, the weight trimmed, the fit better. American culture did not just invent, it iterated. It listened to sergeants as much as to colonels. The vest was not a trophy. It was a tool, improved between dawn and dusk, making the next landing more survivable than the last. Opponents noticed. A captured Japanese medic described treating Americans with dark bruises where he expected torn lungs and drowning blood. He wrote that he could patch the enemy and see him rise again. A German POW, trained as a scout, said he watched men we shot in the chest get back behind walls and call for mortars as if nothing had happened. They were not praising us, they were measuring us, and to a professional enemy, a foe who learns faster is frightening. There is a number that still shocks. At Willow Run, 1B-24 rolled off the line every 63 minutes. That number made a different number possible, the count of Doron panels pressed, shipped, and stitched, because a nation capable of that aviation miracle could field an infantry miracle too. The same hands that riveted bombers, stamped buckles, sewed pockets, and packed crates. The same rail, lines that moved engines moved armor for men on foot. The same priority that put airfields on coral put plates in jackets. Nothing in war stands alone. The vest mattered because it rode a wave of American capacity. The test results fed the surgeons. Surgeons fed the planners. Planners fed the depots. Depots fed the rifle squads. Rifle squads fed the next set of notes. This wasn't magic. It was the habit of a republic that had spent 2 years turning factories into arsenals and statistics into lifelines. When a Doron panel shattered a shower of splinters and kept a heart beating, it validated 1,000 signatures made by people who would never see a beachhead. When a Marine stood after a sniper's center mass hit and moved, he was the closing argument those people deserved. On Okinawa, the weather smelled like wet dust and rot. The fighting was house to house, ridge to ridge. An M1918, a 2-bar bit off bursts, a Garand's en bloc clips chimed on stone. The vest pressed hard into chests as men took a knee and swapped magazines. Every detail made pride possible. The M1 helmet scuffed white at the edge. The canteen warm. The Doron plate warm too, like a second sternum. Men did not call themselves heroes. They called themselves lucky. But luck had been engineered, boxed, shipped, signed for, and worn over beating hearts. A young private felt his plate smack under a mortar burst and went blind for 3 seconds. When sight returned, he found a hole torn in his pocket and a spider-webbed square where a lung should have been. He laughed, cried, cursed, and stayed in the fight. That is survivability turning into momentum. One man stays in the squad. One squad stays on the street. One street opens for a company. A company opens a day. A day opens a campaign. This is how industrial strength becomes human strength by saving breath at the ground level. Americans were not the first to try armor. The Soviets strapped on SN-42 steel plates in city fights. The difference was not the idea. It was the loop. It was how fast the idea moved from drawing to depot to doorway, and how eager leaders were to let sergeants and surgeons change it on contact. When the enemy realized we would not wait a year to fix a pocket, morale cracked in places artillery never touched. In the end, the only ceremony the vest wanted was sweat, no speeches, no banners, just the measured breath of a Marine who did not die when a classically perfect shot hit him. A country thousands of miles away had engineered that breath. 1,000 hands had made it happen. The lance corporal on Okinawa would never shake those hands. He would carry their work into the next street and the next, and he would live to say thank you with a note home that read, "The plate caught it." A corpsman knelt in mud on the Shuri line and counted the silent seconds that once meant a dead man. He stared at a Marine whose chest rose slow but steady and realized the old math had failed. Rifle-proof armor was fantasy for foot soldiers. Steel was too heavy and too stiff. Motion would die under weight. But most battlefield wounds were not from straight bullets. They were fragments, stone, wood, steel thrown by mortars, grenades, mines, and ricochets. Solve that, save chests, keep squads moving. America solved it. The problem was ugly and specific. Thoracic wounds kill fast. Lungs fill, hearts tear, arteries open. The solution had to be light, worn all day, and good enough to turn killers into bruise makers. Doron panels did that. Glass fibers in resin looked ridiculous next to rumors of invincible steel. Yet they defeated the common threat, and the common threat is what wins or loses campaigns. On Okinawa, where caves spat splinters and houses threw nails, light plates over the heart and lungs bought medics minutes and officers choices. The first time a German-trained sniper watched an American rise after a center mass hit, his craft cracked. He could still take headshots. He could still aim for lung hips, but exposure time doubled. Counter-sniper teams hunted him. Radios pulled mortars like a curtain across his entrances and exits. The economy of his profession, one shot, one kill, quick egress collapsed into risk. We moved twice as often, a POW scout admitted later, and they found us more. The vest did not make bullets bounce like marbles. It made certainty evaporate. Marines learned to fight into the vest. Stack order put vests up front in doorways. Throw angles changed, tight and low. Combat medics taped ribs and pushed men back into the line because the wound was pain, not death. The vest and the radio danced well together. A saved breath became a calm call. A calm call became a clean fire mission. A clean fire mission cleared the next block with fewer names for the chaplain. That is doctrine meeting data mid-war, on contact, without waiting for peacetime conferences. Americans were not alone in curiosity. The Soviets wore SN 42 inches, the worst urban hells, and it worked for their fights. But the United States held the advantage that wins arguments. Speed. Speed to test. Speed to ship. Speed to change. A supply sergeant who saw a pocket ride too low did not file a complaint. He moved the pocket that night and wrote the depot. The depot listened. The next batch came better. That is how a republic fights, with a bias for action and respect for the man who has to kick the door. E.B. Sledge wrote of Okinawa's filth and terror, and of men who endured what should break a soul. He did not romanticize anything. He recorded the rain, the rot, the stench, the fear, the sudden blasts that ended friends. In that honest landscape, a vest mattered because it made survival plausible without lying about war. A Marine could say, "It hit the plate," and mean both a miracle and a plan. He could feel bruised ribs and keep moving because someone at a bench had found a way to give him another breath. One truth outran myth. Fragments did the killing most days. The vest met the war where it lived. Grenades turned from butchers into bullies. Mortars became less like reapers and more like roadblocks you could go around. Platoons dared short, quick dashes because a plate had turned a sliver of chaos into calculated risk. The mission's math shifted. Enemy officers saw it in their casualty sheets and their delayed schedules. They heard it on the nets when Americans hit doors faster on Friday than they had on Monday. The gear list around the vest tells a second story of American power. M1 helmets with webbing that fit. M1918. Two BARs with enough ammo to keep a lane closed. Garans reliable in mud. Radios that worked. Plasma in boxes that arrived on time. A country that could ship a B-24 every 63 minutes could also put the right things into the right hands at the right hour on the right street. No single miracle won the day. A chain of small miracles did, link by link. A German POW radio man remembered what the change felt like over the air. "Their wounded still talked," he said, grudging and amazed. "And we heard them call fire." That is dominance in the details. A vest keeps breath in a chest. Breath keeps words steady. Words place steel on target. Steel breaks resistance. The enemy was competent, brave, and skilled. He could not match a system that turned compassion for the individual into operational momentum. "War is brutish," Sledge wrote, and the vest did not make it clean. It made it fairer to the men who had to do the dirtiest thing asked of a republic. It said, without speeches, that a free people would spend ingenuity to save sons as well as to take ground. The result on Okinawa was measurable in fewer funerals and faster advances. The result in memory was something else. Pride without boasting, gratitude with grit. In the end, the corpsmen who counted silent seconds found fewer of them. He found groans where there used to be quiet. He found eyes open where they used to dim. He taped ribs, pushed, morphine, and watched squads stand. The problem had been cruel. The solution was simple enough to hold in 2 hands and stitch into a jacket. That is an American answer. Not perfect, not heavy, not theoretical, just good enough. Right now, to turn a sure loss into a living man who can still move. And moving men win wars. The crate left Michigan at dawn and reached the Pacific before the mess hall coffee cooled, and a corporal on Okinawa felt the weight of that speed press flat against his ribs. He had cursed the vest at sea because the herringbone chafed and the straps bit when he doubled over with the M1 Garand, but on a street in Naha a mortar cracked, and the plate took the slap and left a spiderweb he could touch. He coughed, checked that the handset still worked, and kept his voice steady as the 81mm mortars walked smoke down the next alley. That is how a factory hour becomes a foxhole second. We are a nation that turns minutes into momentum. Willow Run proved it by rolling a B-24 Liberator off the line every 63 minutes at peak, 4 engines and 110 feet of wings pulled into daylight like a promise. That cadence taught every shop a lesson. If you can build bombers with a clock on the wall, you can stamp buckles and press Doran panels and ship them in lots that matter to squads on contact. Quartermaster officers signed manifests after midnight because trains would not wait. Foremen switched dies because a sergeant wrote that the pocket rode low on tall men. Navy stevedores hustled crates over wet planks because tides do not negotiate. The chain moved because every hand in the chain believed time was a weapon. In the rubble of Naha, the corporal who had sworn at the vest no longer swore. The vest let him keep moving after what used to end a day, and his movement was the difference between a plan and a prayer. He pointed 2 fingers, the stack flowed through the doorway, and the barman cut a lane with short, mean bursts, while the Thompson whispered in the dust. A Corsair rolled in low when the orange panel flashed on the roof, and a Sherman with a girl's name chalked on the glacis clanked up to shoulder the wall. None of that would have mattered if the first man down had stayed down. He didn't. That is what a crate at dawn buys you at dusk. A German sapper taken prisoner near Shuri said the quiet truth. We planned for fear after mortars. Your men moved. He did not mean moved later, or moved with hesitation. He meant moved now. And now is the adverb that writes doctrine. Fragment-heavy weapons, mines, grenades, splintering beams lost the old terror because a plate over the heart turned a kill into breath. Breath meant a calm call for a shift left. Breath meant a squad leader who still had the air in his lungs to shout, "Doorway! Anchor left!" Breath meant the plan could keep pace with courage. On Sugarloaf Hill, the island shook like it wanted the men slid off its back. The bar sang, the Garan's en bloc clips chimed on broken tile, and the plates under sweat-wet jackets caught the sharp hail that used to make a chaplain's list longer by sundown. The Marines didn't brag about the vests. They joked to bleed off fear, and they pulled at straps when the air went heavy, but after each blast more men stood than the enemy expected. That small arithmetic, repeated street by street, became a ledger the defenders could not balance. This didn't happen by luck. A depot clerk learned the names of places he'd never see: Yonabaru, Kakazu, Shuri, and signed faster. A factory shift boss pinned a note on the board. Tall pockets up 1-inch fleet request. A marine supply. NCO took needle and thread to make a pocket ride right for the first man through a door. When a nation respects the hands that move small things, big things move with them. The vest was not a trophy. It was a tool sharpened by feedback, and our genius is that we listen to corporals as well as to colonels. The enemy was competent and proud of craft. He adjusted hides, shifted aim from chest to chin, moved twice as often, and risked longer peaks through a 4x scope on a Mauser 98K. He still lost something you cannot get back once it's gone. He lost certainty. One perfect hit no longer guaranteed a still body on the street. That loss rippled backward through platoon plans and artillery timetables until whole sectors slowed. Meanwhile, our sectors sped up because the man who should have been a statistic became a voice on the radio saying, "Drop 50." At night, the trade winds pushed warm air through torn screens, and the men slept light with plates warm against sore ribs. Somebody tucked a cracked panel into his pack and wrote home that he would send it with a note that said, "This caught it for me." Somewhere in Michigan, a press operator watched a gauge tick true, wiped his hands, and started another run. Two lives that would never meet were working the same problem from opposite ends of a rail line, and the answer was breath. Every stenciled crate carried the same hidden label: time. Time for plasma to arrive. Time for a corpsman's hands to finish a dressing. Time for a squad to cross before a gun woke up. Time for a sergeant to finish one sentence on the net. Push 2 more houses. We did not ship invincibility, we shipped minutes. Minutes became momentum. Momentum became the feeling in a defender's chest when he realized the hunted could still hunt him. When the platoon rotated off the line, the corporal turned in his vest with the quiet gratitude fighting men keep private. He touched the starburst and said nothing, because some debts are too large for words. The enemy learned about that debt in the hardest way, through silence where a kill report ought to be. That silence multiplied until it sounded like boots rising after shots that should have ended stories. The factory miracle and the foxhole effect were 2 sides of the same American coin, and they paid out in breath. A nation that can roll a bomber in an hour can roll hope to a foxhole in a week. The distance from a Michigan press to a doorway in Naha is measured in miles and character. We chose to close that distance, to value a heartbeat enough to design for it, pack it, ship it, and wear it. That choice made rifle fire less final and made our advance more sure. A crate at dawn became a life at dusk, and that is what victory looks like when it is honest and American. A platoon leader felt the air tear and the world tilt when a mortar burst sprayed his chest with splinters, and the door-on plate thudded like a sledge on bone but did not let the cold in. He rolled, tasted salt and dust, and put the handset to his mouth. The words clipped and clear: "Smoke 2, shift right, 50. That sentence should have been a eulogy. Instead, it became a map. The whole company marched for the next 10 minutes. Minutes are everything in battle. We found a way to buy them retail and spend them wholesale. Medical officers already knew the ugly math. Thoracic wounds killed fast. Lungs filled. Hearts tore. Arteries opened. You didn't need armor that made a man a tank. You needed armor that bought the medic enough time to reach a heartbeat. Door-on panels did not make bullets bounce like pebbles, but they shredded fragments, slowed penetrators, and turned fatal shock into bruises that burned like fire. On Okinawa, where caves spat nails and timber shattered into knives, that change shifted whole days. A corpsman ran bent over, slammed down beside the lieutenant, and pressed a palm under the plate, feeling pain but not the drowning he used to find. He taped ribs, pushed morphine, and said, "Stay with me." Not as a ritual but as a plan he expected to work. The lieutenant stayed. He stayed long enough to fix a gun along a wall, long enough to pull a squad through a gate, long enough to pass the mission like a baton. That is what minutes do. They turn one survivor into 10 who finish their part. Enemies watched and recalculated. A German scout captured later explained their shock with a professional's honesty. "Your wounded still talked," he said, "and we heard them call fire." He meant the radios. He meant the chain that runs from a chest that still rises to a mortar that still answers. He meant that even a good shot did not silence the voice that moves steel. When a foe cannot silence voices, he loses the control a defender needs. We learned to plan around those minutes. Platoons placed vest wearers at the tip of a stack, cut the angles tighter, and kept grenades close, trusting that a bad second would not become the end of everything. The bar's rhythm stayed steady, because the gunner with the plate up front stayed on his feet after splinter bursts. The Thompson gunner shifted left, and the Garand man on the right fed fresh en bloc clips with the little chime of courage. Discipline fills gaps, but survivability closes them. The vest was a bridge where there used to be a break. Doctors turned notes into doctrine. They saw fewer sucking chest wounds. They saw more men return to duty. They counted who lived and wrote orders that said weight penalties were worth it for assault troops. This wasn't theory. It was a ledger. Fewer funerals on Friday than on Monday. Faster pushes through streets with names nobody at home could pronounce. That ledger does not make war clean. It makes it fairer to the men who have to step through a doorway knowing a hand grenade waits on the other side. We saved minutes with more than armor. Radios that didn't quit in the wet, plasma that stayed cold in the heat, air that showed when panels flashed, those were minutes too. But the plate was the personal promise. It sat hot against skin and said, "You will have time to breathe again." Breathing meant aiming. Aiming meant rounds on target. Rounds on target meant fewer enemy guns answering, and fewer enemy guns meant a faster leap to the next, a wall. The cycle turned, and every turn made the next burst of fragments a little less final. A Japanese POW medic who dressed American chest bruises admitted it with a small shake of the head. "We expected silence. You spoke." He meant that their calculations about shock and fear failed. They planned to stall an assault with splinters, count to 10, and counterattack into men curled on the ground. Instead, they found squads moving through smoke with leaders upright and radios hot. That sight tells you what matters in modern war. It is not only the weapon, it is the time to use it. An infantry story is not numbers alone, but some numbers are a prayer. AB-24 every 63 minutes meant there would be more bombers in the sky, and it meant more shipments on the piers, and that meant more panels in more jackets when a platoon like ours needed them. It meant minutes packed in crates. It meant a piece of Michigan under a Marine's palm when he slapped his chest and laughed too loudly in the middle of a street because he was still here. Pride sits heavy in a plate you can hold. A German POW stretcher-bearer put it softly. "We counted replacements. You counted saved men." He wasn't jealous. He was observant. He had watched his army bleed under logistics that couldn't change fast enough, and had watched ours stretch supply lines until they reached a doorway and a vest. The idea did not need to be perfect. It needed to be there on time. We made on-time ideas our brand. The platoon leader, who should have been a memorial, walked out of that sector with a taped chest and a tired smile. He wrote a letter home that said only, "It hit the plate." His family would touch the words and know 1,000 people they would never meet had pulled on the same rope to make that sentence possible. The rope ran through factories, depots, docks, and hands in foxholes. We used that rope to pull men out of seconds that used to drown them. That is how you turn minutes into victory. A German-trained sniper lay over a Mauser 98K with a 4x scope braced on sandbags and watched a sergeant step into the street, and the shot broke like a twig, and the man jolted but did not fall. The sniper had done everything right: range, wind, drop, trigger press clean, and for a breath he felt the old pride rise up. The quiet certainty he could sell to any commander. One shot, one body. Then the sergeant dragged himself behind a corner, slapped his chest, and yelled into a radio that answered with the low cough of an 81mm. Certainty drained away like water in sand. A new rule had arrived without asking. He moved hides twice as often after that because he had to shoot higher. Headshots took a longer settle. Pelvis shots meant a second chance for the quarry. The longer he looked, the more he risked a counter-sniper team with a pair of binoculars and good radios. The vest in the American's jacket did not make him bulletproof. It made the hunter slow, and slowness is death to a sniper. The economy of his craft, fast hit, fast exit, collapsed into a waiting game he couldn't afford. Across the street, an American spotter with a field phone listened for that single hard crack that betrays a trained marksman and drew an X with chalk on a map. He didn't need to be a legend. He needed the man he saved with the plate to stay up long enough to say, "Second window, right." The squad slid left. The bar rolled a lane. The Thompson whispered. A Sherman's Coax roared like a big dog. In 10 minutes, the nest that had owned the block turned into a room with dust hanging and brass cooling on the floor. The sniper's craft wasn't dishonored. It was outlearned. The POW who had been that sniper later explained it to an interrogator without bitterness. "You stole time from me," he said. "I had to look longer." He was a professional. He respected adaptation. He had seen Soviet steel breastplates shrug pistol and fragment in cities and had made his peace with that. He could not make peace with an enemy who blended armor, radios, mortars, and speed into a loop that changed in weeks. The vest forced the switch, the loop did the rest. Marines adapted too, because that is what we do. They changed their stack order, put the plate up front, cleared faster, and accepted that a bruised rib is a cheap price for keeping the voice on the net alive. They learned that a man who keeps breathing keeps calling, and a man who keeps calling puts steel on the place that matters. The vest and the radio were partners. The radio says where. The vest makes sure someone can say it. A German scout described the new math with a soldier's frown. "We lost pressure," he admitted. "Defenders sell pressure. Every alley a trap, every doorway a confession, every chest shot a letter home. Lose pressure, and you sell time to your enemy instead, and we bought it with both hands. In that trade, a free nation always wins because we know what to do with extra minutes. We stack them into plans, and we run those plans while the other side waits for certainty that never comes back." The sniper did not give up. He moved to a new roof, counted bricks, breathed slow, and tried again. He hit a corporal center mass and saw the man bend, slap his vest, and keep going like the hit had been a thrown stone. He whispered a small prayer he had used since the Eastern Front and felt it land on silence. Silence is what happens when a rule you trusted breaks under someone else's idea. He backed away and knew the flank was already coming. We did not fling magic at him. We gave our men a plate, trained them to move, and trained our teams to listen for the crack that means danger. We put a mortar tube within earshot of every street that mattered. We told tankers to edge close and lend a gun to a window when a radio asked nice. We made industrial strength feel like a hand on a shoulder in a room full of dust and fear. It is the opposite of romance. It is reliability under fire. The best compliment came from a captured radio man. "Your wounded kept talking," he said. Ours went quiet. He didn't say it to flatter us. He said it because you cannot ignore the sound that kills your plan. As long as we kept men breathing, we kept the net alive, and as long as we kept the net alive, we walked steel and smoke onto places where a sniper hid. He could not beat that a second day in a row. Nobody could. The sergeant who took that first hit mailed his spider-webbed plate home at war's end with a note that read, "This caught it for me." His wife pressed a thumb to the crack and understood that an idea had stood between a bullet and her kitchen table. That is the final victory over a sniper's certainty. We did not make death impossible. We made life more likely. We made the hunter do math he had never needed, and in that math his edge dissolved. We are a nation that breaks an enemy's rules with speed and mercy, and we do it so a man can finish a sentence on a radio and the mission he names can finish the day. A clerk at the San Diego depot flipped a tag from red to green, and a pallet of Duron plates rolled toward the pier, and that tiny act set off a chain that ended in a doorway where a Marine needed one breath more. Test in the morning. Ship by noon. Fight by night. That was the rhythm. A tech in Midland pressed fiberglass and resin into clean sheets. A quartermaster major signed a requisition at 0200 because convoys do not wait for daylight. A beachmaster checked a manifest as cranes squealed and booms swung over wet planks. The crate moved. The ship sailed. The plates found the men who would step first. On Okinawa, the doorway was a mouth of dust and fear. A Marine stacked left with a Thompson M1 A1. Another stacked right with an M1 Garand. The barman covered the lane. The first man wore the vest and felt the plate sit warm and hard against bone. He did not call it a miracle. He called it insurance. A grenade popped near his chest. The plate took the slap. He stumbled, breathed, and spoke into a handset that still worked. That saved breath became a clean call. Smoke 2, push right. The stack flowed. The room turned. Momentum survived because a square of resin and glass had bought a handful of seconds. The loop had many voices. A gunnery sergeant scrawled on a crate, Pocket up 1-inch tall men. A depot stitcher moved seams without a committee. A foreman in Detroit taped a sign above the punch press. Fix it Tuesday, not next year. We gave authority to the person closest to the bruise. We trusted a corporal's grit like a colonel's plan. When a system treats rank and truth as partners, small changes arrive fast enough to matter under fire. Enemy observers watched and recorded. A captured German scout described it simply, "Your improvements came like rain, small drops, every day, until our plan was wet and slow." He had seen armies write long reports and wait for perfect answers. He saw us sow, test, ship, fight, and repeat. He respected it. Professionals do. Respect wasn't enough. He still lost because respect doesn't close the gap between a committee's schedule and a corporal with a needle at sea. Air and sea fed the loop. A corsair rolled in when an orange panel flashed from a rooftop and put rockets where a sniper had sat the day before. A destroyer slid shells across a ridge when a forward observer had time to finish a grid. The vest bought the time. The radio cached it. The mortar tube signed the receipt. It felt ordinary as it happened. On the ledger that counted lives saved and streets taken, it was extraordinary. The loop made ordinary excellence repeatable. There were numbers behind the feel. Willow Run rolled a B-24 Liberator off the line every 63 minutes at peak. That cadence trained us to measure output by the clock, not the calendar. If you can build a 4-engine bomber by lunch, you can press 1,000 plates by dark. Liberty ships slid down ways by the hundreds. One, the SS Robert E. Peary, went from keel to launch in 4 days and 15 hours. When speed like that becomes normal, you can think big and act fast in the ugliest weather a war can throw. E.B. Sledge wrote, "War is brutish, inglorious, and a dirty business," and men in clean shirts listened to a Marine who wrote from the mud. He said fragments ruled the day. He said fear lurked in every bamboo thicket. He said leadership lived or died on whether a wounded man could still speak. The loop took those words like orders. It shipped plates to where fragments flew. It packed plasma to where fear hit hardest. It sharpened radios so the wounded could still talk a mortar round onto the right alley. POWs touched the loop's edges too. A Japanese medic taken near Shuri told an American doctor with a tired shrug, "We expected silence. You spoke." He weighed a cracked plate in his hands like a tool from the future. He did not lack courage. He lacked a conveyor belt for ideas. We had one. We fed it with notes, sweat, and the belief that better today beats perfect tomorrow. In one fight, a sergeant felt the plate smack like a big hand and stayed up. He thumbed a flare. "Smoke." He counted 1, 2, 3, then pushed with the stack tight to the wall. On the roof, a signalman flashed a panel. A corsair tucked and fired. The rocket blast opened the far corner. The squad poured through the gap. That was the loop moving. Plate to breath, breath to radio, radio to air, air to movement, movement to a cooling room, and a new line bent on the map. The enemy adjusted aim and hides, but every adjustment cost time. Time is the coin that buys a sniper's life. We took his coin away. A chest hit might not end a voice, so he aimed at a head. Headshots take longer. Longer is louder. Louder is death when mortars listen. Day by day, the loop made him poorer at his own job, not by insulting his skill, but by changing the bill he had to pay. What made it American was not only speed, it was kindness wrapped in steel and cloth. We built the loop to win and to bring sons home. The plate saved a man. The saved man finished his sentence on the net. The sentence brought a rocket. The rocket saved 3 more. Every link in that chain was a person who believed a heartbeat matters. That belief moved from bench to boat to doorway and kept moving as long as we had breath to push it. When the infantry rotated off the line, the loop did not end. Cracked plates rode home in duffels with notes that said, "This caught it for me." Factory men pinned them to corkboards. Depot stitchers saved pocket patterns with salt still in the cloth. A nation built an altar to improvement out of things that had been hit and held. We did not worship war. We honored survival by making it more likely tomorrow. That is why the loop mattered. It turned love of country into a system that does not quit. The clerk in San Diego never met the corporal in Naha. He flipped a tag from red to green and reached for his coffee. The corporal slapped his chest and went through a door. Between them ran the loop, humming like a bomber line, honest as a tool, fast as a tide. That is our genius. That is how America wins, by turning good people into a chain that does not break when bullets fly. A Liberty ship slipped from a West Coast pier heavy with ammo, rations, plasma, radios, and neat crates stenciled DORON. The ocean smelled like salt and fuel oil. Booms swayed. A petty officer shouted numbers that matched a manifest signed in the middle of the night, because ships that miss tides miss battles. Logistics is not a hero's speech. It is a promise kept on a clock. America kept it so well that enemies began to fear our schedules as much as our guns. You felt it when you were hungry and still got what you needed. A Marine platoon came out of a lane, choked with dust, and found a beach depot laid out like a grocery for war. Water cold enough to sting, dry socks in waxed paper, fresh batteries, and a bundle of plates for men who had spider-webbed theirs on stone. Nothing in that kit was glamorous. Everything in it killed delay. The first man through a door fought taller when he knew his plate and radio would be there tomorrow too. Factories taught the tempo. Willow Run's B-24 seconds came a bomber an hour at peak. The Detroit Arsenal tank plant pushed out M4 Shermans with 75mm guns in strings that looked like a parade. Liberty ships were the workhorses. Simple, fast, replaceable. 2,710 were built, and one SS Robert E. Peary went from keel lay to launch in 4 days and 15 hours. When speed like that becomes common, you can think big and act fast, even across the biggest ocean on Earth. The Red Ball Express in Europe moved 412,000 tons in 81 days. A different theatre, same truth. Massed movement wins as surely as massed fire. In the Pacific, the distances were longer, and the reefs had opinions, but the habit held. Load what men truly need, move it faster than fear. Put it in their hands before dawn, do it again tomorrow. That habit breaks defenders the way rain carves stone. They wake to find plans thinned by a country that treats time like ammunition. A Japanese officer captured near Shuri said it clean. Your ships were rivers that did not dry. He had counted on storms, reefs, and distance to make our plans brittle. He learned that cranes and tides answer to men who refuse to let them rule. When a radio called for plasma, a box arrived. When a platoon cracked 2 plates in a week, another bundle showed. When a mortar team burned through fuses, a pallet waited with a matching tag. Trust travelled on paper and rope and steel. In a street fight, a runner sprinted into a courtyard where a Navy beach party had stacked goods in straight lines on scraped earth. He slapped a form on a crate, grabbed 2 plates and a battery, and was gone in a minute because the dock crew built flow where delay could not hide. The barman got his gun back up at the corner. The platoon leader felt a fresh plate sit right against bone. The radio hummed alive. A small fix cascaded into a cleared block because logistics let tactics breathe. We were not stingy with kindness. A German POW, working a US depot, wrote later, "They built as if time were a weapon." He meant civility alongside speed. He meant boxes labelled so a tired private could find what he needed without a map. Mercy did not slow victory. It sped it, because order chews chaos like rations. A system that respects people moves faster, and speed is the currency that buys lives back from the brink. Names and numbers mattered. An M1 helmet with webbing that fit. An M1918A2 BAR with enough magazines to sing for a block. An 81mm stack arranged so fuses could be set without hunting. A Doron plate riding high enough to guard a tall chest. The difference between a good day and a bad day was often an inch of strap or a minute on a clock. Our logistics machine shaved inches and minutes until the enemy's math failed. The enemy's shock wasn't only that we arrived with more, it was that we arrived on time. A sniper who planned to own a street for 30 minutes found he owned it for 7. A mine team that needed a morning to reset found Marines at the door at dawn because boats had unloaded all night. We pushed so regularly that defenders felt late for a meeting they hadn't scheduled. That feeling hurts courage. It teaches even brave men their clock is someone else's property now. The sea tried to stop us. Weather slashed schedules. Hulls groaned. Men got sick. Tugs nosed ships anyway. Winches sang. Bulldozers as big as houses carved roads out of sand, their engines thumping like drums. Crates wrapped in waxed paper shrugged off spray. A tag punched in San Diego matched one red on Okinawa, and that simple match was a line of trust from home to street. Trust makes men bold. Bold men finish missions. A Marine who had cursed his vest on the transport because it bit his ribs stood in a depot aisle and asked for another after a plate went white with cracks under a mortar burst. He got it in 30 seconds. He slapped it into the pocket and went back to work. He did not salute a miracle. He nodded at a system that carried him like strong hands. The system had a soul. If a thing saves a life, it should never be late. Your wounded kept talking, a POW radio man said. That line explains logistics in a sentence. A man who can still talk asks for what he needs. A system that listens puts it in his hands. He keeps talking. The mission keeps moving. The enemy hears a net that will not shut up and knows deep in his bones he faces a country that turns schedules into weapons and boxes into breath. We did not worship crates. We cared what they did. A plate arrived. A voice stayed on the net. A rocket run carved open a corner. A squad poured through. A line bent our way. Then we did it again tomorrow. That rhythm was our anthem. The booms and cranes were the orchestra. The crates marked DORON were the drumbeat. Every beat promised the same thing. You will not fight alone, and you will not run out of what keeps you alive when it matters. When the Liberty ship cleared the harbour, the wake spread bright. A petty officer checked his clipboard and smiled because every number matched. Far away, a corporal pressed a new plate against a sore chest and breathed easier. Between them stretched an invisible bridge of timetables, forklifts, pencils, and faith. We built that bridge every day until even our enemies could recite our schedule. That is logistics as a superpower. It looks like work. It feels like mercy. It wins like thunder. The battalion commander and the surgeon leaned over a crate lid used as a desk while shells thumped the hills and argued a hard question with a human answer. Do a few pounds of armour save more lives than they cost in speed? Both men loved speed. Both had buried men who never got a second breath. Doctrine had to pick a side. Medicine brought its ledger. Thoracic hits are where we die, the surgeon said, tapping casualty cards. Stop those, you buy minutes. Minutes save units. The problem was simple and mean. Heavy steel plates could stop more, but they stopped men too. Light Doron panels could not beat every rifle hit, but they blunted fragments, and fragments ruled days like Okinawa's. The question wasn't romance, it was arithmetic. How many lives do you save when a vest turns a lung tear into a bruise? How many leaders stay on the net long enough to finish the call that moves mortars one grid square and keeps a company from walking into steel? The answers came back in numbers men could feel. Aid stations saw fewer sucking chest wounds where plates were worn. Medics pushed morphine less for chests and more for shattered legs. That meant breath stayed where it belonged. It meant a man could talk. Talking meant fire missions could be corrected in real time. A forward observer with a plate who didn't drown in his own blood could adjust 81mm by 10 yards and open the alley the rifleman needed. The surgeon did not need poetry. He had the ledger. The ledger won. Doctrine wrote itself in the ledger's margin. Put vests on the first through the door. Put them on radio men, on bar gunners, on leaders who must keep moving forward. Train, so the plate becomes a second rib cage, not a burden shed when a man is tired. Teach stack order that respects survivability as much as firepower. Drill the call that follows a hit. Breathe, speak, place fire, keep the lane alive. A vest that saves a breath saves the chance to finish that call. A Japanese POW medic, questioned near Shuri, told it with honest sorrow, "We expected your chests to fail. Many did not. We had no way to match you." He meant doctrine too. He had watched a machine that fused medicine and orders. He had seen our doctors tell our colonels what to do and be heard. That shocked him. It delighted us. In a free country, the man who counts the bodies can overrule the man who writes the plan, because truth outranks everything when sons are on the line. Numbers from home fed the choice. Factories were guarantees, not slogans. The men who wrote doctrine knew they could ask for vests and get them. They knew a pocket that rode too low would ride higher next batch. They knew cold plasma would land, penicillin would be on the shelf, sulfur would be in the pouch. Doctrine without supply is a sermon to the wind. Doctrine with supply is a bridge you can run across under fire. We built the bridge before we sent men over it. Enemy officers did their own math. A German staff captain wrote in a report taken with him, "Their wounded continue to command." He meant the net. He meant that a man struck but still breathing would not leave the fight fast enough for a defender to cash in the delay. He meant our doctrine saw a wounded chest, not as a closed book, but as a page still worth reading. That is a kind way to fight. It is also deadly to an enemy who counts on shock to stall a day. Training areas back home issued vests and ran men until the gear became habit. The weight taught respect. The saved breath taught belief. When those men hit Okinawa's shattered blocks, they moved with a rhythm that had doctrine and medicine written all through it. The first carried the plate. The second guarded the corners. The third held the radio and could speak long enough to shape the fight. The fourth dragged a wounded friend with the confidence that the friend could live to joke about it. The surgeon kept a log of miracles and near misses. A sergeant took a jag of iron and wood at the heart line and stayed pink under a plate that had gone white with cracks. A forward observer bled from the shoulder but called a rocket run that opened the alley the company needed. A private who would have drowned in his blood a year before told a joke while a corpsman taped his ribs. That is doctrine proving itself one breath that makes 10 more possible. Costs were honest. Men tired. Straps chafed. Heat made tempers short. Doctrine listened. Leaders rotated vests to breachers, to radio men on critical pushes, to bar gunners anchoring corners. They did not hoard the tool or leave it in closets. They put it where the day bent. Each time it bent our way, a defender somewhere felt his calendar slip. He had planned on delays. Those delays failed to appear. His next plan started late. Late is death in war. A German PO radio man gave the feeling in one sentence. We heard voices we had wounded. He expected silence to do his work for him. Silence did not come. Voices kept talking, calm or angry, but talking and talking makes artillery honest, tanks safe to approach, and squads brave enough to cross open ground. Doctrine and medicine had linked arms and refused to shut up. The commander and the surgeon met again a week later. They did not argue. They compared notes. The numbers were better. The men were tired but alive. The commander sent a message up the chain formalizing what they were already doing. Prioritize vests for point men, radio men and leaders. Adjust training to armor the breath. Write supply tables that treat a plate like a magazine. The message didn't feel heroic. It felt right. Heroism isn't only charge. Sometimes it's a pen that writes a life into policy. At dusk, the surgeon walked past a stack of cracked plates waiting to ride home in duffels. He touched one, felt the rough bite where a shard had chewed resin and thread, and smiled a tired smile. Behind him, a medic laughed at a joke a wounded Marine told through gritted teeth. Ahead, a company commander read his map and planned tomorrow's push with the steadiness of a man whose doctrine matched his men. That alignment is rare. We made it common. Doctrine met medicine and shook hands over a crate lid. A nation listened, built what was needed, and delivered it on time. An enemy listened too, and learned that silence could no longer be trusted. We turned data into orders, orders into training, training into saved breaths, and saved breaths into streets taken and sons returned. The war stayed cruel, it always does. But more men came home because wisdom and logistics agreed on how to keep a chest alive. A sergeant stepped to a blown doorway in Naha on 1 April 1945 litres, day for 10th Army, and felt the Doran plate press warm to his chest while his thumb traced the N-block clip of his M1 Garand. A barman set up to his left, the M1918, a 2's bipod biting stone, while the radio man checked the handset and nodded. The first grenade snapped like a dry branch. Fragments rattled his vest and hissed against the M1 helmet's rim, and he stayed upright long enough to say, "Smoke 2, push right, 50. That sentence pulled 80, 1mm rounds down the alley like a curtain, and the squad flowed through as if the street had volunteered. This is dominance in the details. Gear that works, bodies that keep breathing, and a clock that runs on American time. Our details had names and numbers. The 1st Marine Division, the 6th Marine Division, and 24 Corps soldiers from the 7th and 96th Infantry Divisions came ashore with LVT, 4 Amtraks hitting sand and coral in a tide of olive drab. F4, U Corsairs from carriers offshore answered orange panels with rockets, their Pratt & Whitney R2000, 800 seconds snarling over roofs. A Sherman with the 75mm gun nosed to a corner and gave the doorway a steel shoulder. None of this mattered if the first man down stayed down. He did not. The Doran plate stole a kill from splinters and gave seconds back to the radio, and seconds are what the American way of war knows how to multiply. Doctrine turned into muscle memory. Point man up front in the vest, Barr in overwatch, Thompson low and close, Garand steady, radio tucked where breath, could still reach it after a hit. The corporal tapped the doorframe twice. The stack moved, like a single thought. When the second grenade spun under a window, the plate took the slap again, and the radio voice stayed calm. Shift 10. Drop. In that calm you could hear factories, depots and cranes, the whole country pushing through one man's lungs. The enemy was good. A Mauser 98K with a 4x scope owned angles until we shortened them with smoke and speed. A sapper could lace a lane with charges that would have ended a push on another island in another year, but Okinawa met a different America. We had radios durable enough to live in rain, plasma that stayed cold, and vests that traded funerals for bruises. We turned a defender's perfect minute into our good minute, and a good minute is enough when air, armor, and infantry think together. You could measure the details by sound. The Garand's ping as an 8-round clip popped clear. The BAR's hard, even bursts. The chuff and thud of the 81mm. The deep heartbeat of a Sherman's radial engine at idle. Add the quiet things. A needle-pulling thread on a pocket raised an inch for tall men. A depot clerk's stamp matching a tag on a crate. A winch's whine at a pier in the dark. The sergeant breathed, and that breath was the sum of 1,000 honest noises. A German POW radio man gave the line that explains this chapter. Your wounded kept talking. He spoke it with a professional's respect, the way men who understand stakes talk about the craft that beat them. He meant Doran plus doctrine. He meant morale that trusts supply. He meant radios that cash the seconds a plate buys. He meant an orchestra of details, all in tune, all on time, all aimed at keeping a voice on the net long enough to finish the call. We did not pretend the vest stopped rifle fire clean. We did something better. We built a system that turned a non-fatal hit into an advantage. When a sniper was forced to aim high, his dwell time grew. When his dwell time grew, counter-sniper teams and mortars found him. When they found him, the street belonged to the squad in the vest. It wasn't magic. It was logistics and leadership applied to ribs and radios. A Japanese medic captured near the Shuri line shook his head at a cracked panel and said, "We expected silence. You spoke." He had bandaged Americans who should have been dead and watched them stand. He was brave and competent and trapped in a machine that could not change fast enough. We were many things, but above all we were fast with the right details. Fast enough to raise a pocket in a week. Fast enough to move plates from bench to doorway before men learned the wrong lesson. At dusk, the sergeant mailed the spider-webbed panel home with a note. This caught it for me. Somewhere, a press operator in Michigan checked a gauge and started another run. Somewhere, a beachmaster in khaki marked a manifest with a grease pencil and sent a pallet forward. Somewhere, a clerk in San Diego flipped a tag from red to green. The street in Naha stayed American because a vest let a voice finish a sentence. That is dominance in the details, and it looks like breath. A corps commander read the week's reports and saw fewer KIAs where vests rode high on ribs, more RTDs returned to duty where fragments once took men out forever, and objectives taken ahead of schedule. Numbers don't bleed, but they tell the truth. Willow Run rolled a B-24 Liberator off the line every 63 minutes at peak. 8,685 of those long-winged bombers came from that one plant. Liberty ships 2,000. 710 of them carried war to the enemy and life to the front. And one, the SS Robert E. Peary, went from keel to launch in 4 days and 15 hours. When a nation treats minutes like ammunition, even the impossible feels late. The Red Ball Express hauled 412,000 tons in 81 days across Europe. Different theatre, same heartbeat. Back home, American workers turned out roughly 324,750 military aircraft during the war, a number so big it sounds like fiction until you stand on a line and watch metal grow wings. We built 1,051 LST's ships that carried tanks straight onto enemy shores, and 21,147 Duqua amphibious trucks that walked supplies from Surf to Foxhole. We made more than 5.4 million M1 Garands, an 8-shot rifle that turned steady hands into steady lines. These numbers matter because they become breath at the front. Body armor fit into that engine of excess. Doron panels were not produced in bomber quantities, but they moved on bomber schedules. When a battalion cracked plates in a hard week, the next week stitched fresh ones into herringbone jackets. Aid stations logged fewer sucking chest wounds among men in vests. Medics recorded bruised sternums where fatal shock once lived. Those aren't slogans, they're ledger lines, and ledger lines change orders of battle. A German POW stretcher-bearer said the part nobody sees in a parade. We counted replacements. You counted saved men. He knew what a Liberty ship means to a private. Not glory, but a crate with the thing that keeps your heart beating. He had watched our trucks arrive when the road still smoked, and he had watched our wounded speak into radios. He had heard the difference in the net. A voice that should be gone, still there, still calling. Consider the cascade. One vest keeps one leader on the net after a mortar burst. One leader corrects fire by 10 yards. One fire mission opens a corner for a platoon. One platoon takes a block an hour early. One block taken early becomes a battalion's flank secured before dusk. The report a corps commander reads at week's end says, ahead of schedule, and that cold phrase holds a dozen warm lives. Stats that don't seem real are only unbelievable until you walk the chain that connects them. The B-29 Superfortress, pressurized and powered by 4 Wright R3000, 350 seconds, flew at altitudes where flak thinned and range expanded. The P-51D Mustang's Merlin engine escorted daylight bombers all the way to Berlin. These aren't side notes. They are context. A nation that can field a pressurized heavy bomber and a long-range escort fighter can also field a vest that arrives in time. The same logistics that lifted aluminum to the stratosphere lifted a square of resin to a doorway in Naha. Enemy officers did math too. They knew our aircraft totals. They watched LST numbers climb into 4 figures. They learned the Red Ball Express by name. But the stat that broke morale wasn't the tallest bar on a chart. It was the sound of a wounded American still talking. That noise says the other side has found a way to make death less efficient. When your strategy depends on delay and casualty shock, a vest that trades fatalities for bruises is a math problem with no answer. We should be exact about pride. The United States produced roughly half the world's manufacturing output by 1945. Lend-Lease sent mountains of steel to allies, while our own lines never emptied. We could outbuild, outship, outfly. But the most American numbers are quiet. How many men returned to duty? How many letters home started with, "It hit the plate"? How many commanders reported reduced thoracic fatalities, instead of writing another list of names for chaplains? Statistics became strategy because we connected them to lungs. A Japanese POW medic, asked what surprised him most, said, "Ice, plasma, plates, and shoes." He meant abundance that respected the human frame. He had tended enemy soldiers who did not drown when they should have, because a square of Daron bought a medic the minute he needed. He had watched a platoon leader, taped and saw, return to the line in days, not months. He had learned that kindness keeping a man alive was our sharpest weapon. Willow Run, Liberty Ships, Red Ball, LSTs, DUKWs, B-29 Seconds, P-51Ds, and the humble M1 Garand. Every acronym and airframe fed a scoreboard where survival turned into speed. Doron plates were small, but every big thing is many small things working together. The reports that stacked on the Corps commander's desk told a story that sounds impossible until you remember who we are. We make minutes. We ship them. We spend them at the front where a vest turns a mortal blow into a breath, and a breath into a call that bends the day our way. That's the stat that wins. A private wrapped his cracked plate in brown paper and mailed it home with 5 words. "This caught it for me, honey." That sentence crossed an ocean on the same arteries that carried B-24 Seconds, Liberty Ships, and LSTs, and it landed in a kitchen where someone touched the spider web and understood America in one object. Other nations were brave. Other nations were clever. But only one nation could invent a vest mid-war, press it by the thousands, ship it in weeks, fit it to the men most likely to need it, change the pocket in a batch because a corporal asked, and repeat until a sniper's certainty died. That is not accident. That is a character trait with cranes. Why only America? Start with scale, but don't end there. We built roughly 324,750 aircraft, 2,710 Liberty ships, 1,051 LSTs, and more than 5.4 million M1 Garands. Willow Run rolled a B-24 every 63 minutes, and SS Robert E. Peary went from keel to launch in 4 days, 15 hours. Those are not just tallies. They are proof that we could take a sketch from a bench, turn it into a production line, and put the result on a man's chest before the enemy adjusted his aim. Speed made ideas lethal. Add culture. Our surgeons could tell our colonels that thoracic wounds were the killer and be believed. Our sergeants could tell our depots to raise a pocket and be obeyed. Our beachmasters could prioritize crates because a platoon had cracked 2 plates that morning. In America, truth outranks pride. The best idea in the room can come from the man who will carry it. A free country fights like a free country works. Hands up, voices heard, decisions fast, tie in kindness. We do not keep men alive to collect medals. We keep them alive because they are ours. A Japanese medic said the 4 words that hide a revolution: ice, plasma, plates, shoes. He saw a system that treated human beings as the point. That mercy bled an enemy dry because it turned casualties into fighters again and again. It taught the other side that even their successes might not stick. It made resistance feel like bailing a boat with holes. Consider psychology. A German sniper confessed after capture, "You stole time from me." He meant that a vest forced him to look longer, risk more, and lose the thing his trade sells, certainty. He meant our radios stayed loud. He meant mortars arrived faster than fear could recover. He had served on the Eastern Front and seen steel breastplates do what they could in streets. He had never faced a foe who could change a pocket by order this week and land rockets by panel in the next breath. Remember integration. B-29 Seconds flew pressurized and far. P-50 1Ds walked them home. Red Bull moved mountains. Liberty ships bridged oceans. LSTs kissed reefs and disgorged tanks. Do-cars waddled across surf. Depots put plasma and plates on tables. Aid stations cleaned wounds that would have been eulogies a year before. America's genius is not a single miracle. It is a choir. Doron sang a small, steady note that made the whole song better. When the choir sings, the enemy hears tomorrow arriving today. Add the ledger no enemy could match. By 1945, the United States produced roughly half the world's manufactured goods. Lend-Lease fed allies without starving our own lines. We outbuilt famine and doubt. We printed schedules on fear and made fear show up on time. That is why a private in Naha could trust that another plate would be waiting when the first went white with cracks. And that trust is what lets men kick doors faster on Friday than they did on Monday. We should not hide the cost. Okinawa took more than 12,000 American dead. The island bled civilians and soldiers until the ground could swallow no more. E.B. Sledge wrote, "War is brutish, inglorious, and a dirty business." And we believe him. We built vests not to make war pretty, but to keep sons alive long enough to end it. That is the moral math of a republic. Spend genius on saving people, not just on breaking things. Now, look at the kitchen where the plate arrived. A woman touched the crack and felt the pressure of a press in Michigan, the thud of a winch at a pier, the sway of a boom in rain, the clatter of a forklift on coral, the grunt of a Marine shouldering a door, the calm of a radio voice saying, "Shift 10. She felt a country show up for one chest. She understood why no other nation did this, because no other nation believed so stubbornly that the mission and the man are the same promise. That promise won. It won in streets where snipers expected silence and got orders, in aid stations where lungs stayed open, in reports where, ahead of schedule, replaced held by casualties, and in homes where it hit the plate, began letters that would not have been written at all. We took steel and cloth and resin and turned them into minutes, and we turned minutes into victory. We did it because we could. We did it because we cared. We did it because we are Americans, and when a shot that should end a life does not, the world moves an inch toward freedom.